Good morning, evening, or night, depending on the time you're seeing this. My name is Linda Nguyen, and this is my presentation on Chapter 1, Critical Analysis video. And this is on the Born for Liberty book by Sarah Evans. So starting off with answering the first question, Native women's role in religion and how do they participate, as well as what that allowed them to do. So women at this time were kind of the ones being worshipped. So they were the ones being looked up at by the men or the people in their society. And this is because at this time, the people had perceived their world as sacred and alive, meaning that they were really into the idea of supernatural, the idea of life and death. And that meant they were really connected to nature. And because women were menstruating, they were giving birth, they were controlling crops, and they were just really involved in the means of life and living or even death itself, women were the spiritual leaders, and that connects to the idea of being worshipped. And because of these ideas that women held a lot of power, they gave women more status that allowed them to participate and do what they wanted to do. And as you can see on the pictures on the right, this is some women in a specific tribe, and this is just a few pictures of people worshiping. So continuing on, those ideas of power and status had allowed the woman here to perform rituals. They had become the embodiment of religious myths. As we had read in the textbook, it mentioned that the keeper of the game would sometimes appear as a woman, and that connects to women being the embodiment of religious myths. And this power it was explicitly mentioned in the book that it allowed women to serve as people in medicine, working on the supernatural, motherhood, traders, chief, fishing, building canoes, tents, and etc. And it just allowed women to have more jobs than typical as we would see today or back then in society. And it showed that this was the apex of female political power as it actually allowed them to control economic organization of the tribe, distributing all the food, being more involved in politics. And as you can see on the picture on the right, it's women working in the fields and worshiping. As for the next question on how anyone would help French and Dutch fur traders, what kind of labor they did, and why was it so valuable, it's inevitable that the Indian women had known more than these French and Dutch traders coming over because they had lived there, known the way of living. And so, because they held so much of this knowledge, they gave it over to the French and Dutch fur traders to help them. And so, they were deeply involved in economics, politics, and the way of living, and they had transported those skills over to the French and Dutch, and that made it possible for these traders to survive, as was mentioned in the book. And they did the type of labor they did to help these people survive were building canoes, dressing furs, pitching tents, mending clothing, providing warmth at night, and preserving food. And these things were many of the things that only these women had known to do to survive. So had the French and Dutch just came over to trade and didn't get any help from women at all, it can be seen that they would have been very clueless, possibly had encountered more deaths, and it would have just been very hard to trade. And of course, that did facilitate trade. And more of the labor that they did were being translators with diplomatic abilities. So because women here, of course, knew more than the French and Dutch, they were able to communicate easier with the French and Dutch's economic targets, who they wanted to trade with. And this had ended up creating a new cultural and economic pattern. And it was so valuable because it just gradually allowed the French and Dutch to combine, which I don't really know if it's a really good thing, but it allowed the French and Dutch to reach their goal of trading more, and women had ended up being more involved in politics than before. And as we can see on the picture on the right, it shows a lot of bison, their hide, and it's connecting to how women could also know how to prepare hides, and that would be used to sell. Or it also showed that bison was such a big commodity back in the day that many people were trying to sell, to get, and just help them live. Thank you for listening to my presentation. This is it for Chapter 1 Critical Analysis video.